Welcome to this explainer on the ZuperParents chapter, Why We Parent the Way We Do. If you're taking the time to go through this material, you obviously care deeply about how you're raising your kids. You probably want to understand the roots of your own reactions. We all want to do our best, you know. But parenting is complex, and sometimes our best intentions get clouded by things we haven't fully processed or understood about ourselves. So we really have to start with the fundamental question: why do we parent the way we do? In the thick of daily life, it's so easy to view our parenting struggles, the sudden yelling, the over-controlling, the impatience, as personal failures. We lay awake at night wondering why we lost our temper over spilled milk or a bad grade. But there is something profoundly comforting we have to understand here. Our approach is largely inherited from those who taught us. We aren't making this up from scratch. We are applying a blueprint we were handed long before we ever had children of our own. Which brings us to the concept of inheriting the parenting pattern. As the source material gently points out, this is not a chain of bad parents. It's simply a chain of people doing the most logical thing they knew based entirely on the world they lived in and the way they themselves were raised. Your parents, and their parents before them, were operating on survival mechanisms and cultural norms that made sense for their specific era. They just passed down what they honestly believed would keep you safe and successful. The very first step to unlearning this inherited behavior is naming the pattern so we can actually spot it in real time. It's the habit of treating your child's life as an extension of your own, where their outcomes seem to define your worth. And the most complicated part is that it often completely disguises itself as love. When we push our kids to exhaustion, we tell ourselves we're just loving them by ensuring they have a good future. When we protect them from every minor disappointment, we tell ourselves we're keeping them safe. But often, it isn't love driving the car, it's our own unexamined anxiety. Beneath this protective instinct is what we can call merging our two identities. Without realizing it, we begin to fuse our sense of self with our child's achievements and failures. When they succeed, we feel accomplished. When they stumble, we feel like we have failed. This slowly blurs the boundaries between two human beings that were always meant to stay separate. We lose sight of the fact that our child has their own distinct path, one that doesn't exist simply to validate our parenting. You can actually see this pattern surface in our everyday reactions. It looks like rewriting their school essay just so it sounds a bit smarter to the teacher. It's stressing over how quitting an activity might look on a college application years down the line, rather than asking if the child actually enjoys the activity today. Or it's feeling deep personal embarrassment by your child's public behavior, rather than simply feeling compassion for the child who is struggling in that moment. We're reacting based on how their behavior reflects on us, rather than what it means for them. Now, experiencing these reactions doesn't make you a bad parent. It just means you're a human being running old software in a new world. It's an inherited model. You're operating on a system that was installed during your own childhood, designed for a different time and entirely different pressures. And fortunately, just like old software, it can be updated. We don't have to throw the whole computer away. We just need to recognize that the current program is no longer serving us or our kids. When we finally notice what we're doing, we face an important crossroad: choosing awareness over guilt. It is incredibly tempting to look back at our parenting mistakes and spiral into shame. But the material emphasizes that this reaction is fundamentally unhelpful. Guilt traps us in a cycle of self-attack. You might think, "I've been parenting from ego, what kind of parent am I?" Which honestly just keeps you stuck. It makes the situation about you again and changes absolutely nothing for your child. Awareness, however, is very different. Awareness calmly recognizes what's happening without all the heavy drama and simply asks what we want to do with this new information. It offers clear, calm, and useful clarity. It allows you to look at a mistake, take a deep breath, and say, "Okay, I see why I did that. Let's try it differently tomorrow." So let's look at how this builds into the actual practice of conscious parenting. It really comes down to three distinct steps: the trigger, the widened space, and the choice. Conscious parenting isn't some flawless technique where you never get angry again. It's simply the practice of noticing the trigger. That moment your heart rate spikes because your kid refuses to put their shoes on, and deliberately widening the space between that event and your response to it. In that widened space, you take a breath. you ground yourself. And from that space, you make a conscious choice, rather than a knee-jerk reaction driven by inherited fears. The crucial point is examining where we actually direct our energy once we've created that space. When we pause, what are we trying to achieve? We have to look at success versus true capability. This shift in focus is arguably the most transformative part of the process. We need to clearly preserve this distinction. The old model of parenting dictates, ensure your child succeeds. The better model tells us, help your child become capable. Ensuring success is a losing battle because it relies on too many uncontrollable variables: the economy, timing, industry changes, or just pure luck. Trying to control all of that only leads to exhausted parents and anxious children. Capability, however, is something you can actively build. It's built through your calm presence rather than through pressure and micromanagement. It's about teaching them how to handle life, not how to avoid life's challenges. Capability is built through the stability that lets a child fall, be caught, and learn that falling is entirely survivable. The greatest gift we can offer our children is not a flawless, risk-free strategy for their future. It's a parent who has done enough internal work to show up with emotional stability. A parent whose own identity does not hinge on their child's daily performance. When they know your love and your self-worth aren't tied to their grades or their goals, they actually have their freedom to grow into who they are meant to be. When we step back far enough, we start to see the bigger picture. We see the loop nobody names. This is a generational cycle where parents pour every ounce of their ambition, their time, and their resources into their child. In the process, they quietly set aside their own lives, their own hobbies, and their own identities, believing this total sacrifice is the absolute definition of good parenting. And then, decades later, when the children naturally leave home as they're supposed to, the house gets very quiet. The parent is left alone in that silence. They sit in the empty rooms with a heartbreaking, entirely valid question they never allowed themselves to ask during all those years of driving to soccer practice and helping with homework. What did I want? Not what the family expected, not what looked good to the neighbors, but what did they want for their own life? It is a heavy cost, paid across generations, when parents forget that they too deserve to have a life. The love in this loop is incredibly real. The sacrifice is undeniable. But the loop itself does not have to continue, because you are standing in the middle of this generational arc. You finally have the quiet, daily choice to change what gets passed forward. In today's modern world, with all its intense pressures and constant comparisons, making this choice isn't easy. It means deliberately stepping off the treadmill. It means letting your child be who they are, while simultaneously remembering who you are. You are the first person in your line looking at this clearly enough to ask this honest question before you react. Am I parenting the child in front of me, or the fears inside me?